the active.
I just,
This company.
This time I'll call the York County Council workshop to order. And I think we're gonna turn this over to our Economic Development Director to get us started.
Thank you. I think you want to go into a segment of the presentation in executive session first, is that correct?
If we're gonna be talking about strategies on incentives.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, maybe, I guess, use your discretion, I mean, if you want to do the introduction or overview, but I think the first part really is incentives, and in its entirety, I think that could be an executive session from a strategic standpoint. Is that?
Yeah, it would touch on some strategies, and things that need to be talked in executive session, but we can start off, go in then.
We're gonna take direction from you. You let us know.
So, based on the agenda that you see in front of you and at your table, we're just gonna touch on a few slides about economic development, just a high-level review. Then we'll talk about the strategic plan and incentive strategy, okay? Because there are things in there that were touched on in the 21 strategic plan, and then need to be touched on for incentives. We can come back out and then talk about economic development funding, and specifically economic development funds, as well as some other resource funds that you all have discussion. Wrap it up with communications related to economic development, working with council, talking about corporate things related to what we do in economic development. David's going to help me on some of this, but I'm going to jump in. So, looking at the vision for York County, and what council agreed was the vision for York County as it relates to providing an environment for all citizens and businesses where we can thrive and succeed. I think the key thing there is a balance between citizens and businesses. So when we, as economic development, look at our mission as a department, we thought, okay, well, how do we help accomplish that? Well, we work to lead the initiatives and coordinate economic development activities. It's not just one department or one person that's going to get it all done, but sometimes we have to coordinate with a variety of folks and organizations. But in the end, our activities result in the growth of the tax base, addition of diverse jobs, and assistance for commercial and industrial development, that in the end, our goal is to lead to higher per capita income and a overall better quality of life. It's kind of a general perspective, but it speaks, we think, to how our mission as a department fits for what we want to see as a vision accomplished for York County. I think the key thing to take away, and I stress the creation of the tax base, is when you look at what you guys approve through incentives and our focus on attracting investment, and the value that goes direct to creating tax base and our revenue, it helps us address a challenge in economic development, and that is the cost to serve evaluation. This is the latest and greatest numbers out of our auditor's department, where when you look at the general revenue and $1 that we receive in revenue per type of revenue source, so in the case of 4%, that's residential property, it costs us, the county, $1.38 for every dollar in revenue that we get. So residential costs us money. For 6% property, that's your commercial property, it only costs us 85 cents. And for the other property, which is your manufacturing and fee in lieu of tax type situation, and by the way, we can get you this information, but feel free to take notes for sure. It's 38 cents, okay? So we're...
When they passed the new law, going back to manufacturing, that last column now, because of what they did with the assessment ratio, effectively making everything commercial 6%, you've really got just your Duke Energies and other industry like that out there, that last far right column right now, right?
Duke would be in there and fee property. That's how I understand it.
I just don't know if when Siegler broke
If-
that out, if he factored that into the
Yeah,
equations.
he did, but we can go back to that number. But this is the latest and greatest. So the average assessed value of owner-occupied homes, $247,720. The break-even point on a residential, where they're paying for themselves in that $1.38 column is $341,326. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? So some areas of the county, they're gonna pay for themselves, some areas may not, as it relates to our service model. Okay, as it relates to our service model. I say this because it's important as you look at what we're trying to do and balance the revenue that comes to the county and what we have to then pay for and who pays for what and how do you're gonna talk about our budget in a little while. The more we can make sure that we're balancing out the revenue to help pay for our costs and the citizens and keeping the taxes low, that's an important element. And that's why we do our job, I believe. The other thing, and some of you saw this relate in the Power Team strategic plan event a couple weeks ago, was as you look at the revenue by source, the citizens pay a certain amount of revenue, businesses pay revenue, and tourism also can pay revenue into a York County or a state government. So what we have to do is make sure we're not out of whack. It's not heavily weighted towards citizens paying the bulk of the costs of operation of our county versus business. And to keep that in perspective, I think is important as we talk about what we're trying to accomplish, especially with our incentives and things. I hope that is clear as to this emphasizes why we do some of the things we're doing, especially related to attracting investment.
Are you gonna have another slide explaining any more of this? Like what are the percentages right now of citizens versus business versus tourism for the county?
Yeah, we are working on that data point. I've asked, we should hopefully have that very soon, maybe by the end of the week.
You got an idea where it falls now? Is it a third, or?
Kevin,
Well, I was just talking to Dave. We don't have, you know, if you want to count H-tax as tourism related, and that's really not a fair analogy because the money we get is primarily by residents going out to eat for H-tax. That's the only type of tourism revenue we have, and that's, you know, about $3 million. We're getting a lot more revenue from the citizens' businesses. You know, right now, our tax base, we've talked about this before, we're about 60-40 between commercial and industrial and owner-occupied, which is, you know, a very strong tax base, and I think the goal would be to keep it that way. It has, I think, over the last 5 years, sort of ticked to where the, you know, it's like 41-42%, moved just a little bit more with the residential, but we still have a very, very strong tax base. Last time I looked at Greenville County, for instance, they were almost 50-50 between owner-occupied and commercial and industrial. So, you know, strong tax base. A lot of that's driven by the industrial development along I-77 and the nuclear plant up in Lake Wiley. But, you know, we're very fortunate, blessed as a county, to have a strong tax base.
So you're saying 60% business, 40% from?
Commercial industrial is the category we put them in, is about 60% of revenue comes from that, the other 40% from owner-occupied.
Investment property could fall into
Yes.
business as well? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So another element to
David, just reiterate that point for bump. The break-even point is 341
Yeah,
for a
so-
home.
This
Home.
one?
Yep.
All right, so the
247.
cost to serve model, you may remember this a little bit from before. This is the updated number where for every dollar of revenue, what does it cost us to serve the certain types of taxpayers? So residential is a 4%, it costs us $1.38 as county to service them. Commercial property, 6% is at 85 cents per dollar, every dollar that we get from them, so it costs us less. And then others like your industrial, field property, some others at 38 cents. So to attract industry is very helpful because it subsidizes that. And the break-even point has risen significantly at 4% property at 341,000 home value.
I remember that number was about $150,000.
It's changed.
With the assessed value bump when I got here to the county was 167, I think, 2017-16.
One other thing to really emphasize here is that, you know, we're an economy that ebbs and flows with employment. What we looked at was from 2019 third quarter to 22 third quarter. That was that span of the COVID times, right? How has employment come back? And if you look at the categories, transportation and warehousing, they've come back significantly. They've added 1,330 jobs. Where we've suffered is manufacturing. We're still deficit of 804 jobs. So again, what we're trying to do, and we'll talk about our success and focus in attracting manufacturing and bringing this into a balance. We're behind, and that's due to COVID, but maybe some other things that are happening in the economy and things.
And the big reason for that is that transportation and warehousing in particular, you're not going to generate but maybe 20% of the tax revenue, property tax revenue, as you would for manufacturing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So dynamics in the market, we need to be watching this and be able to respond. So economic development plan and incentive strategy. So let's talk about our strategic plan, and then we'll want to go into executive session on incentives and some strategy discussion. So in 21, Garner Economics, some of you were here, some of you participated. For those of you who didn't, this was an update to our overall economic development strategic plan. We hadn't had an update since probably 2012 at the time. So we went through the effort, support from public and private sector. They funded it, but also showed up even during the COVID time, and we did online intake as well. So there are recommendations on this. Some of you have seen this before, but let's emphasize what are some of the short-term things that we're talking about we need to take a look at and maybe take some action when possible. Governance structure was recommended. We have an economic development board. It hasn't been reset, but what do we want to do with that? And that's a feedback board that was at about 18, we're probably more at about 13. But we have recommendations there. We've talked about it with prior councils. Incentive guidelines, we're going to talk about that. We have some of that already being worked on or has been worked on. Collaborative product development efforts. Product development, we're talking about site development, okay? We're not talking about doing spec buildings anymore. The market's done that well for us, the private side. But we're talking about doing more on the site preparation. There's a lot of property out there, but it's not ready for the market. We got to make it ready for the market, and we'll talk more about that. Infrastructure, land use, funding plan to provide water, sewer, and other things in targeted areas. I know the county's been looking at this. We need to continue that effort and collaborate. I know our department has worked with the comprehensive land use plan update. We met with some of you, but also engaged with the utility side on things that are being talked about. Communicate regularly with the council on all things economic development. Again, why we have these workshops, why we need to continue to talk to the committees and work with you all closely. Longer term, these are the things that were touched on in the plan. Public-private workforce council to help with the talent pipeline. Talent is the #1 topic in economic development today across the country, across the globe. And fortunately, with leadership of council and support and engagement with the York County Regional Chamber, they have stepped up and are taking that on, and we're supporting that. We'll talk about that after a bit, but I think that's kudos to us here as we recognize we need to do something different, and we need to put our money where it's best invested, a group that's going to rise up to the challenge. Learning labs was identified some communities to go look at and understand maybe how they've addressed some of the same issues and opportunities, and we need to maybe think about that. Supporting marketing and product development, external outreach to companies, all that's more long-term down the road a little bit, but I think it's stressed. We can always run and do a little bit better over time. Our department has focus areas that go to the heart of what economic development is, and that's recruiting companies, working to retain and help expand the ones that we have, promote the area because we're the folks who know a lot about our area, so let's tell the world about it. And then working on initiatives that are strategic in nature, but also focused on what could get us the return on any time spent or money invested. And that deals about product. Again, I'll talk about this, but specifically sites ready for the market that people can buy. Workforce development, infrastructure, quality of community and quality of place, things like the parks and things that are important and more of interest to the people who live here and are moving here. So with that, I think just to touch on, we have goals related to the recruiting side, and it's really to build the pipeline, making sure that we're doing everything to, again, increase the tax base, diversify the job base. Retention, engaging our existing companies. Teresa Curtis is in the room with us. She's our business retention expansion manager. We have meetings set up and taken some of you on meetings to these companies. We want to continue that and bring exposure so you guys hear what these companies are saying. But also we're prepared to take action as a council and a community on things that are really important. So this is important to us. Promotion as well. And Caroline Floyd, who's not here right now, but she's our marketing manager. We think we can do it. Some of that's done in cooperation with our friends at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, as well as the South Carolina I-77 Alliance and the South Carolina Department of Commerce. So our budget isn't big there. Actually, our promotional program dollars are funded by York County Road Partners. So a lot can happen, but we need to continue to keep our focus on what brings results. And at product development, I'll stress this. With this, it is a big question that a lot of communities ask themselves. Why should the public side be involved? I can tell you there are examples in this state. For instance, Richland County, Gaston County, North Carolina, Fairfield County. The list is long of counties that have said the market can do certain things, but the market can't do all things for what you want to see or they want to see done, and that is maybe create that opportunity for that next big mega project, or protect the land that's being absorbed at a high rate so that you know you have some runway lanes in the future of industrial and economic development. So what we're saying here, and this goes back to what we've said for years in our strategic planning, is if you're going to attract, retain, and grow the types of companies, sometimes you got to have the product. And so how do we accomplish this with, of course, seeing what the market's doing? We've got a lot of data points we can talk about further, not today. But also, do we need to lead and look at this from a site readiness perspective? Because we can study the market a lot, and we've done that on different properties. But at some point, we got to decide, do we want to do something about it? And what's that take? And how does that get done? And again, there's no silver bullet. I think there are different alternatives we could consider based on your appetite and the potential partners that might be involved. But it's something that when we have done things like the Palmetto Sites evaluation, we've accomplished a greater understanding of what the potential is, but then what, right? And so we have to just figure out how do we want to keep going on things, where it makes sense, where are you guys supportive, and we can go from there. So, target industries, strategic plan looked at industry clusters in our marketplace, the regional perspective, and I think the key here is where you have desirability of attracting certain types of companies who do things for your market and take benefit from our market, and also the feasibility of what our market offers, if it's the workforce, our location, our attributes of cost, things there where that meets, you have your optimal targets. And what the consultant did is they looked at for the making it side, so manufacturing, the imagining side, and think of the open collar, white collar type jobs, and then the agribusiness, they touched on that. I'm going to go into some of these. The experience side, the only thing they touched on there was a support role that economic development in the county could have more for the tourism side. Okay, so that's really what this is. Let's break this down, not make it too complicated, but the target industries that were touched on and how we look at the quality of targets that really make sense based on what we know, what we see, what we experience. Those are listed here. Some of these are companies, these are industry sectors that we know are here and have a strong potential. Some are newer, like for instance, the semiconductor and solar areas where under electrical equipment manufacturing, but industrial machining, metal fabrication, those are the bread and butter that has made York County very successful. There's aspirational targets, and some of those, as identified in these slides, are really about where we have seen strength in the region and some degree of play for our position to win a project or attract a company, but it's really not as strong as the quality target list there. Stretch targets are probably more of, hey, we may need to do a little bit more preparing our community, preparing our resource mix, but there may be interest by these sectors. So for instance, food and beverage. We only have a couple companies that do anything in food processing. We've had interest by certain companies that wanted to do beverage But we don't have a big mix here, and we don't have a lot of resources. But in the region, in the southeast, there are companies that do food and beverage processing. So we might have some potential there. Robotics is another example, but we may have to work a little bit more at it and take a longer term approach.
David, do you think we have some opportunity since Gallo's going into Chester County?
There is some of that possibility. I know the supplier base is being touched by Commerce and the folks down in Chester County. They're not getting a lot of receptivity, but I think it's going to happen over time. Remember, there's a multi-phase project, and I think there are things there that we either can attract a supplier or help them find somebody who can help them here in the state or here locally.
So with the frozen food facility that's going in down in Rock Hill too, and eventually going in, where we're gonna be able to store excessive amounts of food from within that location. Has that triggered other companies though to look at also, now that they have something of that magnitude, what does that generate? And what does that bring? Because that's unique.
Yeah, it is unique, and
Yes.
we've been in touch with that developer and want to talk to them more.
Okay.
They said they will come back in and talk to us about
Okay.
who potential customers are.
Yeah, what are the
But yeah,
attractors
for
to that?
sure.
Because that's
Yes.
unique.
Yeah, it is unique, and let me stress this, food processing is double starred there. That's because it was actually identified in the agribusiness side.
Okay.
It's also related to manufacturing, right? So it's out here, but it's also gonna be kept in the stretch targets, okay? It's been asked, well, what do we do to attract these companies, and how do we go about that? It's a process, I won't get into that, so it can be a lengthy process sometimes, years to do, or very quick. But specifically, we go out on activities, if it's related to trade shows, and some of those are international. I'll be at a composite show in 2 weeks over in Europe, and it's an international composite show. Why? Because that's a fit for us. And anything aerospace related and automotive related, and we have composite companies here. Site consultant events, I'll be at a consultant event tomorrow and next week, where we're meeting one-on-one with site consultants who make decisions and influence decision makers about locations that they need to grow. 77 in the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, I mentioned them, and then existing industry discussions. When Teresa's out there, we're asking about, well, do we have any suppliers and customers that we think need to be closer, and how are they doing overall? Those are important meetings that we have, and we leverage that for attraction. And then other influencers is listed. So imagine it, this is just stressing the headquarters, the back office, the data centers. Those are really good fits, especially FinTech and SureTech, because we're in the Charlotte metro region, right? And that's a big financial services market. And insurance is also a part of that. Columbia has a big insurance market as well. Aspirational, data science and analytics, internet publishing and report. I think the data science side could be a good fit if we worked a little bit closer with Winthrop University. They have a data analytics focus in their business school. Where that starts to hopefully be stood up a little bit more, maybe there's opportunities for us to partner and work with them. IT and computer systems, automation and production technology, I think those are a little bit of a stretch more, because those are probably companies that are going to be closer to a major university, and that talent pipeline that's a little bit different than what we have here right now. So it doesn't mean it could over time, but that's kind of how we've looked at that. Agribusiness, I know this is the interest of some in this room, and I think the cold storage, as Tom highlighted, is a big thing. Agritourism and agricultural suppliers, so people who make the products for agriculture in our state, in our Carolinas, could be a target for us, but also the agritourism. And I think it's important to look at the whole ecosystem, as you see what is tourism and how does that play out for us, where, and what's it going to take is going to be important. And I mentioned already food and beverage. All right, so that's everything up to incentives. So do we want to?
Yeah, motion to go into executive session, talk on economic development items.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we will go into executive session.
Hello, Ken.